Christmas. Welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and hows of newspaper reading. Today I am going to discuss Delhi edition dated 25th December 2017 of The Hindu. So let's get started. So our first news is on page number 1, which says Nota gets more than BJP. Now this news says that a BJP candidate polled fewer votes than those recorded for the Nota option. While the candidate got around 1,417 votes, as many as 2,373 voters opted for Nota. So we'll try to understand from this news what is Nota. So the symbol of Nota is this, and it is usually present in our electronic voting machines. So if you look at our EVM, you have a candidate name and the symbol of that political party to which the candidate belongs. So you'll have names and symbols. Now one of them is Nota, and the symbol of Nota as made here is this. Now what is this symbol? Nota stands for none of the above. It is an option which is provided to voters in most of the elections, and by this citizens can choose not to vote for any of the candidates who are contesting the elections. So this is basically a vote of protest by the voter against these all candidates. So the origin of Nota can be traced back to a writ petition which was filed by PUCL or People's Union of Civil Liberties in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court then directed the Election Commission to provide necessary provisions in either ballot papers or EVM and another button called Nota so that the voters can decide not to vote for any of the candidate in the fray and can do so while maintaining secrecy. Now this is very important because earlier also there was an option. A voter can decide not to vote for any of the candidates. But for that, a voter had to ask for a different slip, and the secrecy of the voter was not maintained because everyone knew that this voter has asked for that extra slip and given his or her resentment. But now, since the button is provided in the EVM itself, a voter now goes to the election booth and in the EVM exercises this Nota option, and nobody knows whether this voter has given a vote to this candidate or press the Nota button. Now the symbol of Nota was designed by National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad, and this Nota option is of great significance. The first significance of Nota option is that it is expected that eventually the political parties would be forced to make sure that people of high moral and ethical values are chosen as people's representatives. So we can say that it is a great step towards clean polity. The other significance is that it gives a great right to protest to voters. For example, here more than 2,000 voters voted for Nota, but only 1,400 people voted for this particular candidate. So people definitely did not like this candidate. They would prefer none of the above over this candidate. So this gives a big right to protest. Third is that because of this step, that giving a right to protest to voters is a sign of maturing of India's democracy. That means we give an option to our voters to even reject all of the candidates, and we get that protest registered, which can be a huge lesson for all the candidates. And it is also expected that since now voters have an option to reject all the candidates, those voters who did not prefer voting because of corrupt or criminal candidates standing in the election might also prefer to come to election booth and register their protest against those candidates. So it might increase, and it is expected to increase, the voter turnout. But then some say that none of the above option is not effective, and there are various criticisms which they give. The first is that it does not give right to reject. This is because even if Nota has registered highest number of votes, still the person who got the highest number of votes after Nota will be considered elected and will win the election. In order to understand, let's consider there are 3 candidates and one is Nota. Say this candidate registered 11 votes, this candidate got 14 votes, this candidate got 9 votes, and Nota got 16 votes. By first past the post system, 16 should be the winner. That means none of the above. But in our current system, this is not allowed. That means person B or candidate B still becomes our elected representative, but the overwhelming majority voted for none of the above. So that is the biggest criticism, and therefore people say that it is a wastage of vote. and it's just a tool to express resentment with no concrete or effective action against the candidates who are standing in the election. So in order to make nota more effective, many suggestions have been proposed. The first suggestion which people give is that if you have a situation like this where you have nota as the highest securer of votes, then re-election should be held. Now the second suggestion says that in such a situation where a re-election is to be held, the cost of re-election should be borne by these three parties together because they did not put up candidates which were acceptable to majority of the people, and therefore they should bear the cost of re-election. The third suggestion is that if votes received by nota is higher than a certain percentage, then re-election should be held. For example, consider this scenario where we have these three candidates. Now Election Commission can declare that if nota secures more than say 20 votes, then re-election would be held. And now if elections are held and candidate 1 say gets 14 votes, candidate 2 gets 25 votes, and candidate 3 gets 18 votes, and nota gets 23 votes, then re-election should be held because the cutoff set by the Election Commission was 20 votes. And the cost of re-election in this case should be borne by the political parties of candidate 1 and candidate 3. And the last recommendation, which is very important, is that it says that those candidates which lose to nota should not be allowed to stand up for elections again for a defined period of time, say 6 years, say 5 years, because these candidates were so bad that they could not stand up to people's expectations and they have no right to contest in future elections, at least for some time, till they reform themselves. So nota was introduced in 2014 in Rajya Sabha elections and is now used in almost all assembly elections. Let's look at this article from the exam point of view. From the pre point of view, we should know that nota stands for none of the above. From the mains point of view, we should know nota because it is a major step, a major reform taken by the Election Commission on the directive of SC towards clean politics and towards making India a mature democracy. We should also know what are the various measures which can be introduced to make nota a more effective tool towards cleaner politics. That completes this article. Let's move on to the next article. So on page number 7, the important article is, the important article is this, which is place on record amended draft of tribunal rules, says SC. So this article basically deals with tribunals. And what are tribunals? So tribunals are basically courts, but they are not courts of normal jurisdiction. That means these courts have very specific and predefined work area. For example, NGT deals with environment, Income Tax Appellate Tribunal deals with matter related to income tax, Competition Appellate Tribunal or COMPAT deals with matters related to anti-competitive practices, and then there are many others. So these tribunals were not originally present in our constitution. They were added through 42nd Amendment Act 1976 in the form of two articles, Article 323A and Article 323B. Now, Article 323A mainly deals with administrative matters and it establishes administrative tribunal, whereas Article 323B deals with tribunals related to other matters. So, as we have covered the basic of tribunal, let's move on to this news. Now, this news says that the petitions challenge dilution of judicial independence. So, this article is basically about recent Finance Act 2017 through which the Government of India has introduced various provisions which are said to dilute the independence of these tribunals. So let's analyze the news in detail. So in this news, the Supreme Court has asked the Centre to place on record the amended draft of the Central Tribunal, appellate and other authorities, qualifications, experience and other conditions of service of members, Rules 2017. Now these rules are currently under challenge in the Supreme Court for modifying the terms of appointment and functioning in various statutory tribunals and causing dilution of judicial independence and posing a threat to constitution. And the government said that the draft of these amendment rules would be placed before Supreme Court on January 4, 2018. These rules would then be given to amicus curiae appointed by the Supreme Court, and the court also said that the amendment should be in consonance with its past decision on tribunal appointments. So let's understand what are the amendments proposed by the government, how they violate independence of judiciary, and what are the past decisions of Supreme Court on tribunal appointments. Now the Finance Act 2017 proposes various amendments with respect to tribunals. It contains various provisions. The first provision is this. It proposes to merge or replace various tribunals with some other tribunals. For example, Competition Appellate Tribunal would now be replaced by National Company Law Appellate Tribunal. Similarly, the Cyber Appellate Tribunal and the Airport Economic Regulatory Authority Appellate Tribunal would be now replaced by TDSAT, which is Telecom Dispute Settlement and Appellate Tribunal. Now, there is big issue with this merging or replacement of tribunals. The issue is that this body, say Telecom Dispute Settlement and Appellate Tribunal, may not have the expertise to adjudicate matters relating to pricing of airport services, which is currently seen by this body. Similarly, if you see the National Company Law Appellate Tribunal, it deals with matters related to disputes and governance of companies, and it may not have the wherewithal or the expertise to deal with the matters related to anti-competitive practices, which are currently dealt by Competition Appellate Tribunal. Similarly, Cyber Appellate Tribunal requires different type of expertise, and TDSAT may not have the technical knowledge to deal with cyber issues. Therefore, many are opposing the replacement of merging of these tribunals on the basis of quality of adjudication by the replaced tribunals. The second issue, and the more important one, which has been questioned by this article also, is it affects independence of judiciary. Now, this act through section 184 allows the government, that is the executive, to make rules for qualification, appointment, terms of office, salaries and allowances, resignation, removal, and other conditions related to service of members. Also, the act provides for common terms of office not exceeding 5 years, and a common age of retirement for all the tribunals has been fixed. Now, there are two issues with this provision. The first is allowing the executive to determine the appointment, resignation, removal, reappointment, etc. could affect the functioning of these tribunals, and it violates independence of judiciary, and it's particularly worrisome because it gives rise to conflict of interest in all those cases where the government would be a party, and the government is actually a party in most of these tribunals, for example in income tax or in railways or in administrative tribunals or in NGT or in customs and various others. Also, if we look at previous judgments of Supreme Court with respect to functioning of tribunals, the Supreme Court in 2014, in a case related to National Tax Tribunal, had held that appellate tribunals have similar powers and functions as that of High Court. And this is really very important because this means that matters related to appointment, to resignation, to removal, etc. must be free from executive involvement. Now, as Section 184 violates the Supreme Court judgment and the independence of judiciary in general, it is currently under challenge in the Supreme Court. The third issue with the Finance Act is that this act overrides NGT Act and 16 others Act related to various tribunals which actually provide for the qualification and condition for the appointment of their members. Besides that, the amendment says that government can change this list of 17 tribunals just through a notification. That means parliamentary approval is not required. Now, this is worrying because in all these tribunals, as the government is a party and the ultimate controlling power with respect to the appointment and qualification and removal is now with the government, it violates the independence of judiciary completely and interferes in the independent functioning of tribunals, which according to Supreme Court are equivalent to high courts. Now let's look at this article from the exam point of view. From the exam point of view, this is important both with respect to prelims and mains. With respect to prelims, we need to know what are tribunals, what is the Constitutional Amendment Act which set up tribunals, what does Article 323A and 323B deals with. With respect to mains, we need to know the provisions of Finance Act 2017 and how it violates the independence of judiciary. We should also know the previous Supreme Court decisions with respect to the tribunals, which means we should know that tribunals in the Indian political system or Indian adjudication system are equivalent to High Court, and therefore their independence is as sacred as that of High Courts and other courts of judiciary. Let's move on to the next article. So we'll look at this few news quickly. This news is on page number 2. This news is on page number 3 and this news is on page number 9. Now, important things to take from this news is you need to know about the nomadic and semi-nomadic tribes, Gujjars and Bakarwals, which are mentioned in this article. I would not go into the details of these tribes, but you all need to prepare about the nature of these tribes, in which regions they are found. They practice transhumans. What is transhumans? Are they patriarchal or matriarchal tribes, and what are their socio-economic problems? If we look at this news on page number 3, ASU demands error-free NRC. In this article, you need to find yourself on what is National Register for Citizens. It is being prepared in Assam under the Supreme Court guidelines. Why is it being done and what is its purpose? Other thing to take from this article is the Citizenship Amendment Bill. You need to know what are its provisions and why it was in debate throughout the year, because the government aims to grant citizenship selectively to immigrants from our neighboring country. So you need to yourself find out on this. And regarding this article, I've covered this article in extreme detail earlier also. It relates to the problem of pollution in Delhi. It addresses the various sources and it talks about its solutions. And we all know that by technology alone isn't the solution. It means that you control the emissions from vehicles through improved fuel and better vehicle technology. But that isn't the only solution. You need to have some policy measures also, like you increase public transport or better urban planning, or you restrict construction activities, and so on and so forth. So this article talks about the same thing in more detail. I would request you to go through this article and also watch the previous day's DNS. So let's move to the other article. So our next article is the lead article of the day on page number 8. Now this article by Suhasini Haider is on India-Pakistan relations. So before understanding this article, I would today like to give you a general idea of how to study international news from the exam point of view. So this article deals with India-Pakistan. Now Pakistan is our neighbor. And when we study India's relationship with its neighbors, we have to focus on certain things. So first thing we need to know is what is the length of the border which India shares with Pakistan, which in this case is 3,323 kilometers. The other thing which we need to focus is what is the kind of border which India shares. For example, here this region is LOC, because this area is occupied by Pakistan. So it is called Pakistan occupied Kashmir, and this LOC is line of control. Here this region is called the international border, which is well demarcated. The other is what is the geography of this region? What are the rivers which we share? For example, we share the Indus and its tributaries. Besides that, the border passes through a great desert of Rajasthan, which is called the Thar Desert. Here we have Sar Creek, Kori Creek and other saline intrusions, and this area border is very difficult to guard. This is also a disputed region. Besides that, this is a mountainous region and this also poses a challenge to border management. So whenever we talk about neighbors, for example, if we talk about Nepal here, we should know what is the length of India's border with Nepal, which is around 1,751 kilometers. Then the terrain, we know it's difficult here because of the Himalayas. This is the Tarai region. We share a lot of rivers with Nepal. Similarly with Bhutan, Bangladesh. So you should know how is the terrain, how is the geography, what is the length of the border. And then you need to focus on certain things, which are what are the historical relations we have. For example, if we talk with respect to Pakistan in particular, we know that we share a common history. We were one country in the past. We were divided through the partition of 1947. We faced 3 wars in 48, 65 and 71, and we had Tashkent Agreement and Shimla Agreement respectively to conclude them. Then we had skirmishes or big face-offs like the Kargil conflict in 1999. Then we have shared culture, so we should focus on the cultural relationships, which includes language, food, religion, etc. Then we need to focus on our economic ties, and that is for all the neighbors. This can also go for countries which are other than neighbors. We should club all the international news in this category so that when we write answers, we can focus on these aspects. Economic ties would include bilateral trade, multi-regional groupings of which we are a part of, the nature of bilateral trade, that means the kind of prohibitions we have, etc. One aspect which I forgot to tell you is in the cultural ties, we talk about people-to-people ties, like how healthy is the people-to-people interaction between the two countries. Like Do we have a good connectivity? Do people come here for tourism? What kind of visa regimes we have? And so on and so forth. Then we come on to security aspect. Is the country we are talking about is a good friend or is it our enemy? So like we have very cordial relationships with Bhutan, now with Bangladesh also. With Nepal, we have good relations. With Pakistan, we have a different chemistry. So we need to focus on the security aspect. What kind of measures the government of India is taking to protect the country from security dangers from across the border. Like from Myanmar, we know this is an open border and we are now fencing the border, but it's very difficult because of this particular terrain where you have evergreen forest in the northeast Himalayas. With Nepal also we share an open border. With Pakistan we have fenced the border for most part of it. Sri Lanka comes into picture with respect to maritime security and so on and so forth. And then we can have defense relationships. A defense relationship would include whether we participate into joint exercises, whether our armed forces exchange knowledge with each other in these exercises, whether we exchange weapons in trade, whether we have any joint agreements with respect to defense, and so on and so forth. The security aspect also includes terrorism now and anti-terrorism cooperation. Now let's look at this article in detail and what it says about India-Pakistan relations. So the first thing author talks about is the cultural relationship between the country and how it is deteriorating with time. She says that the cultural relationships are at new low between India and Pakistan. Pakistan singers like Abida Parveen and Ghulam Ali are no longer able to perform in India. Also, Pakistani actors have now been barred from working in Indian films. Even Pakistani soap operas are being stopped from being telecasted. So the avenues of exchanging our cultural knowledge and tradition is getting limited with time. The other thing she talks about is people-to-people relations, which is actually part of cultural relations. Now this people-to-people relationship is also suffering because we have very few sports events, and we all know that sports is a very good activity to build relationships among people. And whenever these sports events even happen between India and Pakistan, there is little healthy rivalry, and they actually turn into quasi-military content. Once victory in the game is taken as a victory in a war and the defeat is taken as a disgrace. Besides that, the visa regime is also very strict. Although they are granted for pilgrimage, but for all other travel, they are very, very difficult. First of all, your movement is restricted, they are tightly controlled, and whenever they are granted as an exception to the rule. And such degradation of cultural and people-to-people relationship is not expected in countries like India and Pakistan, which share so much culturally and historically. Like we have common history, we have common language, we share our food, our religion, our customs, and therefore these deteriorating relations are a cause of worry. Now the next point she talks about is the bilateral trade. Now the bilateral trade between the two countries is already a casualty because of poor and unhealthy relationship between the two in general, and it is expected to reduce even further. And why does she say so? She says so because India is now developing Chabahar port, which is somewhere here on the map. Let's make it a little bright. So this is the position of Chabahar port. Now with the development of this port, India would no longer have the compulsion to go through Pakistan to reach Afghanistan or Central Asian countries, and it can bypass it through the sea route. Besides that, India has also started a direct air cargo corridor between Kabul and New Delhi, or between India and Afghanistan. So India is ready to double its trade cost and spend billions in sending cargo via air corridor or through sea, and Pakistan is ready to risk its trade through Afghanistan. It can send its trade to Afghanistan or to Central Asian countries where the security situation is not very good, but it's not ready to allow Indian goods to Afghanistan via Wagah border. So the relationship between the two is really bad, and it is expected with the projects like Air Corridor and Chabahar Port, the trade will reduce further. Definitely. The next thing she deals with is security relations, and these are definitely not showing any sign of improvement. Now, after the 2003 ceasefire had been implemented, the situation had quite normalized. Villages across LOC had returned to their homes and they had started building schools, but situation in recent times has worsened. According to a recent study by United States Institute of Peace called A Line on Fire, from 12 ceasefire violations and 1 death in 2006, we have reached to around 900 ceasefire violations, and 51 deaths in 2016. Now, this is a real bad situation, and the statistics for 2017 are even poorer. And the casualties include 4 deaths, which is of a major, and our 3 soldiers killed on this weekend in ceasefire violation. Pakistan continues to push infiltrators under covering fire, and Indian troops fire back, giving no sign of truce in future. If we next come to anti-terrorism cooperation, there are no good signs either. For example, after the 2008 Mumbai attack, Pakistan publicly promised that it's going to take actions against the perpetrators, but its actions do not follow the words. Moreover, for last 3 years, the Mumbai trial in Rawalpindi has come literally to a halt. The Lashkar-e-Taiba commander Zakiur-Rahman Lakhvi is out on bail. Hafiz Saeed managed to come out of custody last month and is preparing for elections in 2018. And it is he who was the main perpetrator of the Mumbai attack. If we look from Pakistan's side, Pakistan continues to blame India for supporting groups like Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan as well as insurgent groups in Balochistan. Now, it is because of this poor cooperation on terrorism, on security relations, the fate of Kulbhushan Yadav, which might in other times may have been decided by mutual negotiations, currently is in the hands of International Court of Justice. Even in today's newspaper, when Kulbhushan Yadav's mother and wife are supposed to meet him back in Pakistan, India and Pakistan again exchange fire on LOC. Now, these things are not expected to become normal soon, as Pakistan goes into election in few months, and then the election season would start in India again, which might not allow diplomatic niceties to be maintained. But we cannot wait for long, and it's important that relations between the two are normalized soon. Because of first, India has for long opposed any third-party intervention in India-Pakistan relation. But due to lack of dialogue between the two countries, this third-party intervention is increasing with every dispute. And both the countries are going to global forums like UN or Financial Action Task Force, or to ICJ for say Kulbhushan Yadav, to World Bank for Indus Water Treaty, etc. So it's really important that if India does not want any third-party intervention, both the countries sit and talk on various issues. The second point is that major players are coming into picture in this subcontinent. Like US has drawn India into its Afghan policy, and China has high stakes in Pakistan due to its China-Pakistan economic corridor. Even if we look at Afghanistan, India, US and Afghanistan are on one side, and on the other side we have China, Pakistan, Russia and Taliban. Now, forming of such arcs is not good for development of healthy relations between the two countries. Besides that, India has already complicated its position as a regional leader by not participating in SAARC conference, which was to be held in Islamabad last year. Although India is pushing for other multilateral groupings like BIMSTEC, which is Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral, Technical and Economic Cooperation, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal Initiative, or the Indian Ocean Rim Association. But these are regional groupings which do not represent the region as a whole, the Indian subcontinent as a whole, which includes Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, etc. And therefore it becomes very easy to fragment this region, which is being utilized by China, which is entering into these countries through its Road and Belt Initiative. So it might be very difficult for India to emerge as a regional leader in future, and therefore for India's own sake, it's important that India goes back to SAARC and revive it. So the author finally proposes that re-engagement happens only when there is disengagement. It has to start somewhere, and it might be possible that in near future we might not have formal diplomatic relations and a healthy dialogue, but a dialogue or cooperation in areas such as environment, tourism, particularly medical tourism, energy and pipelines should really move forward. Moreover, our cultural relations like interaction of singers or actors should actually happen, and we should have more sports events. Finally, she says that New Delhi and Islamabad cannot afford to be disconnected in a world where connectivity is the new currency. So let's look at this article from the exam point of view. This article is important both from prelims and mains perspective. From the pre-point of view, we should know what is the border length between the two countries and between India and all of its neighbors. Second, we should know in detail about the BIMSTEC, BBIN and Indian Ocean Rim Association. groupings. How many members are there in this group? What is their purpose? Are they military alliances or economic alliances? That we should know in detail. We should also know about SAARC. When was it formed? Where it is headquartered? How many meetings it had? From the mains point of view, we should know this complete article. The different aspects of India-Pakistan relations. We should keep these headings in mind. What factors are deciding the future course of this relationship, like development of Gwadar Port and Chabahar Port, or trade through air corridor between India and Afghanistan, and the effect of US-Afghan policy and CPEC on India-Pakistan relations. So that completes this article. So our last article of the day is on page number 13, and it concerns non-performing assets or NPAs. So the news is about a parliamentary panel's recommendation to government regarding some urgent measures which need to be taken to reduce the volume of stressed assets in the system and increase the vigilance process. Now this parliamentary panel is basically the Committee on Petitions, which made the following observations. It first says that although there is a vigilance system in the banks, but despite it existing, we still have increasing frauds related to non-performing assets. It also says that merely issuing of guidelines by government or RBI for averting of incidents of these frauds did not yield result, and therefore the regulator of the banking system, which is the RBI, has failed to implement or enforce its own guidelines. In order to set this right, the committee had made the following recommendations. The first recommendation which it had made is that the government should direct the RBI to monitor and strictly follow the compliance of relevant instructions with banks and finance institutions on a regular basis. And the next recommendation which it makes is that you revisit the existing vigilance system in the banks, and if there is a need, then please revise it and make suitable amendments. Now this was the news. So the few things to learn from this article is what are NPAs, what are stressed assets, and what is the Committee on Petitions. So if we look at NPAs are called non-performing assets, and these are basically those loans of which interest or installments are due for greater than or equal to 90 days. So what are stressed assets? Stressed assets are defined as NPAs, which is this entity, plus restructured loans, plus written off assets. Now restructuring of assets mean you restructure it in such a form that it becomes easily payable. Like you extend the payment deadlines, or you decrease the interest rate, or you convert the loan to equity. By this provision, bad loan becomes a new loan. And written off assets mean that bank does not count the money the borrower owes to the bank, but that does not mean that borrower is pardoned. Now finally, let's understand what is the Committee on Petitions. Now Committee on Petitions is a committee which is present in both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. In Lok Sabha, it consists of 15 members, and in Rajya Sabha, it consists of 10 members. Now, the members are nominated by the Speaker or the Chairman, and the function of this committee is to examine petitions on matters of general public importance. But these matters of general public importance are only from the union subjects and not from the state list. So that completes this article. Let's look at this article from the exam point of view. Now, from the exam point of view, we should know what is the Committee of Petitions, which can be asked in pre. They can also ask what is the definition of NPAs, what is the definition of stressed assets, in detail about the Committee on Petitions, and what are the various measures recommended by the parliamentary panel to strengthen the vigilance mechanism of the banking system to avert incidences of fraud relating to non-performing assets. So that completes this article. With this, we come to an end to today's newspaper. Let's move on to question of the day.